All right, welcome back to the Picking Your Brain podcast, where we interview people doing ministry at a high level. And on today's episode, we have Dr. David Odom. What's up, Dr. Odom?
Hey, what's up, Blake?
Man, thank you so much for being willing to come on and spend a few moments with me. You were my seminary professor in my master's program. You were my seminary professor in my doctorate program. So I got to learn a lot of what I know about student ministry from you. And so very
Okay,
excited to have
right.
you on today and for other people to get to hear from you.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Yeah, thanks for letting me to come on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, if anybody maybe doesn't know you or maybe attends another seminary, will you just explain kind of what God has you doing right now?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, I'm professor of student ministry here at NOBTS and director of the Youth Ministry Institute. And yeah, youth ministry's been my life. I served in local church youth ministry for over 25 years, and then moved into the teaching side of things. I taught for several years up in Omaha, Nebraska, at a small Christian college there, and this year celebrate 10 years at New Orleans. And so, just thankful for what God's doing and the opportunity to serve.
Well, that's cool. Well, I know you have a ton of wisdom that you're going to share with us today. So I'm excited that. And just real quick, the format of the podcast is super simple. I'm just going to ask a few questions about you as a minister, how you think through ministry, and all those things so we can learn from you today. And I will start with the first question. What advice would you give to a new student pastor? And what should their focus be on year one? So that could be either someone who's brand new in ministry or even somebody that maybe has 2 or 3 years, but they started off at a little bitty church and now they've kind of got that first big boy job, and it's their first year. What should that first year kind of encompass, or what should they try to focus on?
Yeah, great. It's a great question, and I think that first year is very important. I mean, what you're doing is you're setting the groundwork and you're laying the foundation for your ministry for years to come. I think that oftentimes in our new roles, sometimes we have directives from maybe a search committee or personnel committee that has brought us on to the church, and there may be a few directives that they give us, and other times they're just kind of letting us free giving us free reign. But I think ultimately what you want to do is that you want to focus on, I think, relationships and getting to know people, because what you're doing in that first year is that you are seeking to build trust, right? And trust takes time. There's going to be excitement that you're with them and that you're serving in their church, and there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to get to know you and all those things, and that's an exciting time. But ultimately, what you're seeking to do is to build relational trust over time, and they're going to be able to see your consistency, learn from your faithfulness and the way in which you're handling God's word, and all of that is going to help build that relational trust during that first year. Alongside of that, I think what I would say is that I'm wanting to do a lot of evaluation that first year, right? That
Mm-hmm.
as I'm seeking to build those relationships, I'm also wanting to familiarize myself with the way things work at my church, right? I want to understand those processes, and I want to understand uh, the ins and outs of the current ministries that we are offering and conducting. And so that first year, I want to be focused on understanding my ministry, and beginning to give attention to what I would call process metrics, and for me to have a clear understanding of, does my church have a clear process for inviting someone into faith in Jesus Christ, and witnessing and sharing the gospel with them, and then what's the process of leading them towards Christ-like maturity, right? To become a disciple maker. And there would be, some steps in between there. But I want to know the ways in which my church is communicating that and helping people understand, for example, the role and place of worship, the role of small groups that I imagine that would probably have, like Sunday school, small groups, those kind of things, the roles of ministry and mission service, and those kind of things. And I want to begin to help my people connect the dots, so to speak, right? To help them to understand the why behind the reason we do some of the things that we do at our church is to help them to grow spiritually, help them to grow in their relationship with the Lord and towards that disciple making. Um, and I think the third thing that I would want to emphasize is parents from the very beginning. Oftentimes in ministry and youth ministry, we're tasked with what we're doing and the time we're spending with students. Right, that's our priority. That's why they're bringing us on. They obviously want us to spend time with students, and we're going to do that. But I think that I also want to recognize the important role of moms and dads, and that parents continue to be the number one influence on a student's life, and especially in their faith development. And so I want to prioritize moms and dads and getting to know them by name, um, having conversations, meeting them for lunch, seeing them at practices and ball games and all those kind of things that we're going to do in youth ministry. But I don't want to just maybe focus on getting to know those students. I want to focus on that relational connection with moms and dads.
Oh, I totally agree because yeah, if parents are on board, then especially like I was talking about this last night with somebody. Five of our seven grades, we're sixth through 12th grade here. They can't drive, so the juniors
Right,
seniors can. The rest of them can't. And so the only way they're getting
right.
here if mom and dad's on board. So if mom and
There
dad's
you
on
go.
board, they're gonna make it a priority to have them there. So I totally agree. And I wanted to echo too. Um, I love what you said about you're building relationships with volunteers, building relationships with the students, and all those things because you're evaluating and you see things that want to change. What tends
Yeah,
to happen is young student pastors, and I know you talk to more young student pastors than I could even fathom. But like when I talk to them, is they see like, man, I don't like D nows like this. I don't like this is like this. I want to change it. I was like, bro, you have no relational equity. You can't change
there
anything
you
yet.
go. There you go.
But spend that first year, maybe two, just
That's right.
evaluating, looking, seeing what it's doing. And you may not like what D now sounds like because you haven't seen it, but maybe once you see it in the culture and in the context, you may be like,
Right.
oh, this fits. I see why we do it this way. So,
Right.
yes, spend that time building relational equity. So when there is change that happens, you have something to stand on rather than I'm just this young guy that's ready and energetic to do something different.
Yeah,
I totally
that's
agree.
exactly it. Yeah, because I think oftentimes, I want to go through at least 1 year, right? I want to go
Mhm.
through all the major events that my church has already been leading and doing. Certainly, there were some things that maybe I'm going to do new, and some, like I said, maybe some directives and some encouragement from either a pastor or a group of adults that are saying, "Hey, we want you to do this," or that kind of thing. And so I want to begin to address those things. But certainly, I think by and large, I want to journey through the calendar year with
For
what
sure.
is already in place so that I get a sense of what's working and what's not, and to understand a little bit of the history of youth ministry in my context.
Yeah. And I just want to do one more thing and then we can move on to the second one. But like I have some guys that they're being hired on and the pastor will tell them, "Hey, make changes now. Like I'm in. I want you to make
Right,
changes." And that's good. And I'm not telling you don't listen to your pastor, but there's sometimes the pastor may say that to you in an office. You go make changes and you haven't built those relationships with students or parents. And then they start to
right.
revolt, be like, "Hey, what is this guy doing?" And you're listening to what your pastor said. So they're listen to your pastor always, but have some understand what the people are saying and then maybe kind of work a way to do that. Don't just immediately change things because the pastor says, "I don't like how things were done. Do it different."
Do
Have
it
some
all different.
wisdom. Yeah, yes, yes.
Right, right. Well, because I mean, some of it can be, you wouldn't think that it's a major thing, but I mean, obviously, we get it in ministry when we think in terms of of stopping, something that we've been doing or the church has been doing for years, or changing our times or our schedules, and I mean, these can be
Yeah,
significant things, and you're going to get pushback, uh, and you want to make sure that those are intentional and strategic steps, and
for
uh,
sure.
and I think that, yeah, I would also want to maybe build into any of those directives that I'm getting from my pastor or leadership, some built-in evaluation, and to let them know that,
Yeah,
okay, yeah, let's begin to implement some of the things you're asking me and wanting me to do immediately. But at the same time, let's look at, um, perhaps ramping that up, or perhaps
Yeah.
um, making plans now for launching that in the coming weeks or months.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that was a perfect segue to the second question. How should a student pastor define success in ministry? Because we know it's very easy to say, "Hey, last year we averaged 50 students. This year we're averaging 70. Things are
Right.
growing. I'm doing an incredible job." Okay, you maybe had a big sixth grade class that promoted in. You can't just say, that. So how do we define success? I think numbers are good. Numbers tell us things. We need to know numbers, but how do we define healthy success in student ministry?
Yeah, that's so good, and we're always gonna be counting people. We're gonna numbers is always gonna be a thing, right? And it tends to be the primary, if maybe only metric that we're using. We're counting attendance, and then we're counting things like baptisms, which is also
Mhm.
obviously a good thing. That's an indication of folks coming to faith in Jesus Christ and life change, and we're going to continue to do that. But I think that there are other ways of evaluating our success that go beyond just attendance. And you know what I want to do is I want to begin to recognize that oftentimes there's a what Clint Grinder in his book Mind the Gap talks about a an awareness gap, right? He talks about the gap between where we think our students are spiritually and where they actually are, right? And he warns us against the idea that we may tend to when we think about the spiritual health or spiritual growth of our students, we may tend to think of one or two students, right? Or a
Mhm.
handful of our students that we know are sharing their faith, they're living for the Lord, they're reading their Bible, they're on fire for the Lord an amazing way. And if we're not careful, we tend to maybe generalize and think, well, I'm sure that all of my students are growing in the same way. But that awareness gap is
Mhm.
oftentimes there to remind us that, okay, the reality, there may be a reality check that's necessary for us to understand that perhaps the spiritual condition of everyone is not the same, and maybe not everyone is on that growth to maturity that we want them. And the only way to know that is to ask questions, right? We've got
Mhm.
to be willing to have conversations with students. We've got to be willing to get to know them. If I'm in a situation where I've got a group of volunteers, I want to help. I want to train my volunteers not only to know the curriculum and material that we're asking them to lead and Bible studies and those kind of things, but I want to equip my volunteers to have their antenna up, so to speak, and be on the lookout and listening and asking
Mhm.
questions about the spiritual condition of students, right? We
Mhm.
want to be asking them about the last time they read their Bible, what's something God's teaching them, what's some challenge or temptation they're facing, how is God maybe at work in your life or using you in some way in your relationship with others. When I'm asking these kinds of questions, I'm getting an idea, a better sense of where students are spiritually.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is some of that making sense?
It does totally. As you're talking about, I was thinking. So, do you know John Nugent? He's at First or Temple in Ruston.
There you go. In Ruston, yeah.
Yeah, so John Nugent, he came and spoke to my adult volunteers in August, and he talked about a discipleship. I don't know if pipeline's the word, no, benchmarks, discipleship benchmarks. And so he
Benchmarks,
had
right.
laid out inside of their strategy different things. If you're on this stage, you should be at least reading your Bible this much. And I'm making up stuff. But if you're on this stage, you should be at least sharing your faith once a month, or
Right.
there was little benchmarks to say, hey student or hey volunteer, how this is how you help determine where they are in their discipleship process. And I'm not gonna lie, I stole that thing and I've turned it into something for us. Man,
That's
it
so
was so
great.
good.
Yeah. That's
So
really
shout out
good.
John, it was great. But so I have one just for our volunteers that I can hand to them or hand to a student or a mom and dad and say, this is our strategy. We want students to know their faith, take ownership of their faith, and go make their faith known. And so, in those three sections, here's things they should be doing. And so,
Right.
if you're a listener and you're listening and you want to see that, I would love to send that to you. John's is way better. Go find John at Temple in Ruston. But my email address for anybody that's listening, Blake at fbchalton.org. Shoot me an email. I'd love to send you what that looks like. But John's is better. Go find John. Um, but
Well, and
but yes. things like that, I think, are what you're talking about.
Exactly. And I think what we do, we're going to be counting numbers, and what we're doing here is we're just counting them a little bit differently, rather than just
Mhm.
those participating or those showing up and attending. Now I'm looking at and trying to have a sense of how many I have in each of those stages or categories, and
Yep.
and
Yep.
and my goal, of course, is to move students towards greater levels of commitment and spiritual maturity, and to become the disciple makers that we want them to be. Let me mention one other thing that
Please.
I've been involved in working on over the last couple of years is an online assessment tool. Right?
Yes, I've
There's
seen.
this
Mhm.
assessment tool, the student spiritual growth and influence survey is something that we've made available through our seminary website, and it provides an opportunity for you to you send the survey out to students and you ask them to take it. They take it on their phones and they can see their own score, but then you have an opportunity to email us at the seminary, and then we could send you a report, right? And you'd get a detailed report of how your students scored, for example, in spiritual disciplines, how they scored in relationship with God, how they scored in service. And so now I've got some different numbers, right? I've got
Mhm.
some data that's going to help me to understand and see, okay, wow, my students scored lower in this area. So maybe in the coming year, in my talks and maybe curriculum, maybe topics in Disciple Now or camp, I want to emphasize some of these areas that I recognize my students are scoring lower in.
And I don't know why I thought about this, but interesting way you could do that is maybe take your graduating class, or even like pick 5 to 10 that they've been here 6th through 12th grade,
Yeah,
and see them. And if there's like an obvious, now some kids, every kid's different, but if a bunch of them are like not missionally minded, or they're
right.
struggling in missions, it's like, okay, well, that's a trend that every one of them is low on that one, or every one of them is low on sharing their faith. Okay, that's something that helps me see that's something I need to address. So that may
That's
be a way that
something
you
I
can.
can
I don't.
address.
Yeah, I don't know if that's how it's intended to be used, but that's a good way to get an idea.
That's exactly right, and so in a similar way, I know that groups are doing in a similar way. Maybe they're doing sixth graders, ninth graders, and 12th graders, and they're kind of
Okay,
looking at
yeah.
it and beginning to, establishing benchmarks at sixth grade and ninth grade, and then looking for
That makes sense.
change over time. And those are just different ways to utilize that survey approach, where I'm trying to, do away with that awareness gap, so that I really do have a sense of where my students are uh, in their relationship with the Lord.
And you may have said it, but just maybe repeat it. Where can they find this resource?
Okay, all right. So we've got a new website that's for Youth Ministry Institute. It's deconstructingym.com.
Okay.
Deconstructingym.com goes along with I had the book that came out back in
Yeah.
January, and some of the things I'm sharing here even today are in there. But yeah, check out deconstructingym.com, and it's the student spiritual growth and leadership survey.
Okay. Great. I see the book over your shoulder. I was trying to find it. I know I have it close because it's actually on my. I'm going to the beach in a month or so, and this is on my my
Excellent.
shelf
Look at that.
to to actually read it. So, and it's funny you mentioned this book too. Um, I got them right here. I have 3 books I'm taking to the beach. Mind the
Come
Gap. You
on, you
just
got to
talked
have
about a
it.
few. Yeah, so you just talked about Mind the Gap because another podcast I was listening to mentioned Mind the Gap about how you identify, you know, anyway, you talked about it.
Sure,
But
sure.
yes, so
Yeah.
Mind the Gap is on my book one, and then your book is on as well. So that's really
Well,
funny.
and that's so great, man. I appreciate that. That's awesome, and I hope that that's life giving and informative and challenging, all that
Hmm.
stuff. But I've also mentioned really, and I didn't mean to necessarily, but the other gap that Grider talks about in his book is the connectivity gap, right? And when
Okay.
I was talking earlier about processes, this is what Grider is talking about. He's saying that oftentimes our church members, our students, they don't understand the connections between the various ministries that we're offering in our
Yeah.
churches and their own spiritual growth, right? They know that we
Hmm.
have worship service, they know that we have small group, but they don't necessarily see the connection between these ministry opportunities or these programs that we have and their own spiritual growth. And so part of your job, part of my job is to help them understand that, to help them to see that the desire that we have is not for them to just keep showing up. Obviously, we want them to show up, but we want their experiences through these ministries
Hmm.
to impact them in their own relationship with the Lord, and for us to help them to see the reasons why we're challenging them to service, why we're challenging them to share their faith, because each of these things are meant and designed to help them grow and be a part of this process of becoming more like Christ.
I don't know if you're doing this on purpose, but that was a perfect segue to my next question. It's like you're
I'm here
doing
for
this.
you. Come on, Blake. I'm
Yeah,
here.
you're a professional. This is great. So the third question was, how can student ministry better integrate into larger church community? And so exactly what you're talking about. So how do we
Yeah,
take what we're learning in student ministry, and even while they're in student ministry, help them connect with the different ministries of the church, or to
right.
help them transition to that larger church community? How would you suggest that?
Well, we touched on it a little bit already, but again, I think part of this is just the intentionality that is necessary for us. That students are not necessarily naturally going to automatically connect to the church, right? I often say that we do a good job of helping students fall in love with the youth group, but not necessarily falling in love with the church, and that takes intentionality on our part to talk about the things that our church as a whole is involved in and why that's valuable, why it's important, why our students it should matter to them, and it starts with just the way that I talk about things happening at my church. Oftentimes in youth ministry we might have this attitude, and maybe it's in jest or we're joking, and we kind of put down our senior adults, or we joke about some crazy thing that went wrong in this area of our church. And if we're not careful, what we end up doing is sort of bad mouthing our church, right? And talking in a
Hmm.
negative light about the things that are happening. And so I'm not saying that we have to sugarcoat everything. And when things
Hmm.
are not great, I think it's maybe important to acknowledge some of those things. But generally speaking, I want to
Hmm.
be an advocate for my church, right? I want to be a fan of what's happening in our church, and I want to do all I can to help students connect to that. And
Yeah.
what I found in my ministry experience and talking with youth leaders around the country is that the number one way that we help students connect to the overall life of the church is through service, right?
Yeah.
It's through involvement in the various ministries at our church. And so what I'm doing through that is multiple things that are happening when I'm inviting students to serve, is that I know that they're being challenged, right? They're being challenged to
Hmm.
rely on their faith in God and their relationship with the Lord. It's stretching them relationally, it's stretching them in their skills that they're perhaps developing. But I also know that it's also helping them connect to what's happening outside of youth group, because I
Yeah.
want them to move from thinking of our church as some place they go to or that church down the street, and it becoming personal and them referring to it as my church, right? That's
Hmm.
my church where I serve Christ. It's my church where I volunteer and I'm a part of what's going on. Um, and I think sometimes we can think of the traditional things like Vacation Bible School this summer. Most of our churches couldn't do Vacation Bible School without volunteers from our youth group, right? They
For
couldn't,
sure.
handle the number of kids that are going to be on our campuses without involvement from students. So VBS is traditionally an awesome way for students to get involved. But what I'm
Hmm.
talking about is really, all year long, right? Or what are ways in which I can be an advocate for students serving in different ways? And that means that I want to spend time each week thinking about greater levels of involvement in my church. Are there areas where it's all adult driven that maybe I talk with those leaders and say, hey, are there reasons why that a student or some of our teenagers couldn't serve alongside of you in various roles? Um, Many of our churches will have youth Sundays, right? Well, there'll be
Yeah. Hmm.
young people leading on the stage and in other areas and giving the offering. Well, I think that's great, and we should keep doing that. But what I'm looking for is ongoing involvement, right? I'm looking for ongoing integration into the life of the church. And so are there opportunities for students to be in the rotation and serving in various roles? Um, some of our churches have strict guidelines in the bylaws that would restrict students from serving on committees, but where that's not in place, I would just challenge our committee of committees and those folks that are putting that together to consider some of our juniors and seniors, some of our sophomores as potential committee members or ex officio members, however you want to do that. But
Sure.
opportunities for our students to see behind the curtain, so to speak, right? And not be just all upfront things, but behind the scenes opportunities to serve. What What are your thoughts?
No, I totally agree. That's some people will ask me all the time is like, what do how do you get students involved at your church? And so one we have the leadership teams here. And so
Yeah.
like we have and I tried to almost make it mimic what a Sunday morning looks like, our Wednesday night service.
Mm,
So we in the midst like this, we have a greeter team. So like students will stand at the door and greet
yes.
people as they come in. Super easy, but something that happens on Sunday. We have a media team, and so I have we have one computer that's lights. It's like we don't do crazy lights, but just transition from countdown lights to game lights to worship lights. So it's just they're clicking a
Perfect.
button, but that's their first step. And then we have
Right.
another computer that's Pro Presenter. I teach a student how to run Pro Presenter, how to do the things on that. We have another student that's running the soundboard, and so we have a media team every single week. They're running all of the media, which
That's
is really
so
great.
great.
So
Yeah.
when they graduate out, they can join our media team. We have a
That's
game
right.
team. The game team gets on stage and they help lead games. And I tell them, if you can lead games, and we have 180 to 200 students. And so I tell them, if you can lead games for this many students, and you can clearly communicate the game, you can keep them engaged. You have to do improv because you're bringing students on stage. You have to do that.
Right.
If you can do that, you can do anything because
That's
that
right.
is
That's right.
the most difficult thing you could possibly do is leading a game. And so if you can do that, you can do anything. So we have a game team that leads that. We have a worship team that obviously, that easily equates to a Sunday morning. But we try to give away every aspect, like you were saying. Adults were doing a lot of these. We gave away every bit of that to students. And
That's
so
so good.
because we want them when they graduate out of our student ministry and they go to a college ministry or they go somewhere else, I want them to feel weird going to just sit in a service. It's
That's
like
right. Come
I
on.
need to be doing something. I don't want to just sit here. And
Yeah.
so that's exactly what I think you're saying is,
Yeah.
get them served now. So when they transition out, it matches what they're going to be having. And I'm not poo-pooing on ministries that do this, but student ministries that have like these huge nights every single night of like, we're going to give away a golf cart this week. We're going to give away this the next week. Like if that's every week, that's how you get students there. When they graduate out and they go to a college and they go to a little Baptist church that's not giving away a golf cart every week, well, they're going to be
Wow.
like, I'm
Right.
out. That's all I've ever known. They need to
Yeah.
be
That's
falling in
tough.
love with his word, falling in love with worship, and then getting in and serving. Those
And
are the
finding a place
not
to serve.
Yeah, those are not the flashy things that are fun that look good on social media, but they're really what builds lasting faith with students.
There you
And
go.
that's my 2 cents. Sorry, I got on a
Man,
little
that's so
soapbox there.
great.
I didn't mean to.
I love it. That's so great. Yeah. Yeah. And I think what comes alongside this too is that relational thing, right? That they have an opportunity when we're inviting them either within the context of our youth group or with church members in the greater body of believers. They're developing those relationships, right? They're developing, and getting to know these folks that work in media or they're involved people that are
Yeah,
involved with worship, our children's ministries and other areas of the church, and all of these are ways in which for them to build that relational connection so that they see life beyond the youth group.
yeah, yeah. And so yeah, those are great, and we'll great transition to life beyond the youth group. Question 4: What are what are some ways to keep students engaged with church after graduation? I mean, this has been the number since I stepped in
Yeah.
student ministry. Everybody's 80% or 85% walk away from the faith, and and you talk about that a little bit in the book.
Right.
But what are some ways that you've seen that we can do in student ministry, but also as they transition out to help them transition out of student ministry, but joining the local church or even getting through college, all of those things. What would you
All of
say?
those things, right? And oftentimes, and certainly I've been guilty of this as well. But oftentimes, we don't necessarily think about these things until they're seniors, until they're, it's May and they're about to graduate. Oh, I really should have thought through. I'm trying to helping you, move through ministry. But I think that some of the things that we've already talked about go a long way of helping develop that connection to and value and love for the church, so that when students leave our youth group and they graduate and they either stay or they move on, that they would recognize and understand that I need to make church a priority. And so it is something that I think we don't want to wait until junior or senior year, but I want to be willing to engage with my students in such a way that it's helping them to develop that love for the whole church, and understanding that value, and understanding that we're not meant to do life alone. We're not meant to feel like that we can continue um, to develop a strong and healthy relationship with the Lord on our own. That's what maybe a lot of students feel. They feel like, well, okay, I don't have to be a part of a church. I'll be fine. I'll worship God in my own way, and we get that. But the reality is that we were designed for relationships and connection, and that's what designed the church to be, and for us to join in the work that God's doing in local churches, and to be a part of accomplishing His mission, and helping each of us grow more towards Christ-like maturity. It's some of the things that we've mentioned. I think that
Hmm.
one of the things that I would maybe think about emphasizing, um, to help things related to kind of walking away from faith, are really embracing questions and really embracing expressions of doubt, right? Because when we realize that in young adulthood, and as emerging adults, as college students, it's often a time where many are questioning their faith, right? Many are wondering what role my relationship with God is going to play for the rest of my life. They're going to maybe be thinking, okay, yeah, I was a part of church, I was a part of a youth group in junior high and high school, but maybe now I feel like I've outgrown it. What we
Yeah.
do when we help students sort of embrace questions and doubt, and help them to face some of these questions head on, is that we're helping them develop that deeper faith. And that deeper faith is something that's going to be less likely to be laid aside, right? It's less likely to be something where I'm just going to put this aside. Maybe you've heard that expression, that a lot of our young adults are maybe putting faith in a lockbox, right?
Hmm.
During their college years, they're saying, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just going to put this away for now, and maybe when I'm older and I have a job, maybe when I'm married, or maybe when I have kids, I'll get back into church, and I'll start reading my Bible again. And oftentimes we see that disconnect where an individual is sort of separating themselves spiritually from some of the things that were part of their life
Yeah.
early on in life. But what I want to do is I want to try to help our students develop such a love for Christ and value for His Word and value for the church and connection, that it's less likely that they are going to be comfortable with doing that type of thing. They're going to feel that conviction of the Holy Spirit
Yeah.
when they're not engaging in their relationship with the Lord in the way they had. So there's just a
Hmm.
couple of thoughts.
Yeah, no, and I think, like I said, we piggyback off our last, question. It's really that service, that getting them plugging in, not just
Right.
being an attender. I think all of that has to do exactly what you're talking about, of helping them not just put the, like Dr. Richard Ross, when he was here, he came and spoke at a conference we had a year or so ago, and he had that little Jesus figurine, and he said, like, do you taking Jesus with you and just putting him in your pocket and then pulling him out when you need him? That's exactly what it sounds
Right.
like you're talking about. Putting it in the
Right.
lockbox when they go to college, or putting little Jesus in their pocket. They have him, he's there, but he's not actually a part of what's going on. And so helping them see, getting plugged into a local church, I think, is a big part of that. How do you get plugged into that college town you're going to? So us as student ministry, don't just release them, but if I know they're going to Ruston, well, I'm going to say, hey,
Come on.
Ruston's got Calvary Baptist Church, it's got Cook,
That's
it's
right.
got First Ruston, it's got Temple, it's got great churches. Try all of them out. Find one that you can plug into. I think as student pastors, we need to be able to have, so, like, especially we're in Northwest Louisiana, so if you're listening from somewhere else, you don't really know all these places, but I know the 5 or 6 major colleges that majority of our kids are going to. So
Right.
why not have a packet? Hey, you're going to ULM, great. Here's churches there. You're going to LSU, great. Here's Baton Rouge churches that you need to check out. Have these resources to help them make that transition. It sounds, anyway, all the things you're saying as well, I think.
Well, and then and along the line, I think that's excellent. That's exactly right. That's something that we can do, and we can think in terms of it being a strategic element of our ministry. That's saying, okay, yeah, we're saying goodbye to these students, and they're moving on, but we don't want them to walk away from their faith, and so let's provide them with this information that's going to help make the connections. Along those same lines, I know of leaders who are actually taking trips with their students. Right? They're saying, okay, hey, maybe you're already decided to go to LSU, or maybe you've already decided to go to this school, but hey, let's go this next weekend or to this midweek gathering that I know is happening through this
Mhm.
collegiate ministry, right, or this church I'm familiar with. We'll go and I'll introduce you to some of the folks that I know there, right? And that's helping develop some of those connections that when they arrive, they realize, okay, yeah, I already know of this church. I already know of this
Yeah.
gathering. I already know of these students and these leaders.
Yeah. This is a little step that helps make a big bridge, for them to go. I agree.
Definitely.
All all right. Well, let's try to land the plane. And so this one to me is one of the a very important question that I know in my circles we've been talking about. So question number 5 is, how do we as student pastors help students understand a call to ministry?
Hmm.
Like I'm sure you deal with it too. I have churches that call me all the time asking, hey, do you have a guy you'd recommend for the student pastor position? And there's just not
Right.
people out there. Either student pastors are staying right where they are, not wanting to move, or there's not this kind of next batch. There's not a ton of
That's
those
right.
out there. And so Shane Pruitt has a book, obviously, that everybody's probably read by now, but Calling Out the Called.
Yes.
Like, how would you kind of, as we wrap up this conversation, how would you express for student pastors, how do we call out those students that are very obvious, hey, you're called to ministry, how do we help you understand that calling and then kind of make next steps? What would you suggest on that?
That's so good. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for even mentioning this, Blake, because I think it's an unfortunate reality of where we are in our day and age that we've got a substantial number of churches that don't have senior pastors, and then many more that don't have of youth leaders, youth ministers serving in those roles. And I'm with you. We continue to have churches that are calling and asking, for names, and I certainly am trying to make connections where I can. But the reality is that we just don't have enough youth ministers that are willing to go and fill these roles. There are more open positions than we have people to fill them.
Yeah.
And I know Lee was on your podcast earlier, and he was sharing some of the same things that in the state of Louisiana, we have just a tremendous number of openings. And I know a stat I heard about Mississippi was that I think it was 23.5% of churches in the state of Mississippi don't have senior pastors. And so there
Oh
is
gosh.
there is a huge need across the board for ministers. And so as such, I think that in youth ministry, we need to be willing to step up and to continue to talk about the 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 calling that God may have on the lives of our students. So that's where I want to really start. I want to make
Yeah.
sure that as a youth leader, that I'm on a regular basis, not only talking about inviting students to come to faith in Christ, not only talking about baptism, not only talking about a greater commitment and service and these things that we've talked about, but that I also on a regular basis just pose the question, perhaps God is speaking to you and leading you into some type of full-time vocational ministry, like a pastor, like a youth minister. And what I do when I regularly talk about that is that I perhaps provide an opportunity for God and the Holy Spirit to speak in the lives of students for them to even consider that. Have you
Hmm.
considered ministry as a vocation?
Yeah.
As you're thinking about being lawyers and doctors and all these things that we want to be, athletes and all okay, well, all these things that we maybe aspire to be, have you considered the possibility that God may be calling you into ministry? So that's the number
Hmm.
one thing I think that I want to, in my ministry context, figure out a way on a regular basis to have those conversations and say to the group, have conversations even individually to folks to consider whether or not God may be calling them to ministry. What I want to do with those that share with me or talk with me that they do feel some type of calling to ministry, they're not maybe sure exactly what that looks like. Maybe that's to be a pastor. I knew when I was in high school, I felt that God was calling me to senior pastor role. That my dad was
Mhm.
a pastor. I'm a preacher's kid,
Yeah.
and so that was kind of my only, you know, thinking of ministry. Well, that means that I'm called to preach. But when I was in college, I took a youth ministry course, and it just changed my life. And through that semester, God just revealed to me to help me see that through giftedness, through desires, and through interests that I had, and other aspects of life, that He had been preparing me for a lifetime of ministry service with students. And what I want to do is that I want to make sure that in youth ministry, that I'm providing opportunities to mentor, to disciple some of these individuals in our churches that feel a call to ministry. Like I want to be carving out time, in my schedule to spend time discipling them, giving them opportunities to lead, and just inviting them to walk alongside of what I'm doing in ministry. I had a pastor I served with that said, we don't ever want to do ministry alone. If you're making
Mhm.
visits, you're going places, invite folks to meet you there or go with you. And I think that that's exactly what we want to be doing, inviting people to share in ministry, giving them an opportunity to try out some things, to lead, to preach, to
Sure.
serve, and giving them, while they're high school students, opportunities to begin to live out and flesh out that calling that's on their heart and life.
Yeah, no, as you were talking, I was just thinking about this. The last year to 2 years, I've had more students like, well, somehow the conversation will come up. They're like, "So, like, what do you do for a job?" And I'm like, uh, This is what I do."
Yeah, yeah,
They're
here
like,
we
"Wait,
go. Yeah.
yeah, they're like, this is your like job?" Like, and I've always had those conversations, but it feels like more recently. They're like, "Wow, I didn't know that was what you could do. I didn't know that that was like a job." And so I know for me, I probably fail. I never talk about no, I just kind of assume students know that this is what I'm getting paid to do. This is my job. But
Okay. Right.
students don't realize that. They just
Right.
think you're a volunteer, you're there, you love Jesus, that's great, and you're just kind of here. But like, looking in myself, I need to do better at saying, hey, God called me to this, and like, I usually talk about my calling to ministry with adults or with other student pastors or with a whatever, but I need to probably address it more with my students. God called me to this. I
Yes.
felt called maybe to do this area in the secular world, but then God made it clear, no, I have this for you. And so, yeah, as student
Yes.
pastors, it's we have those students that get it and they feel called to ministry, they want to preach. It's easy to get those plugged in and give them opportunities. But yes,
Right.
we need to do better, talking to myself, do better about helping the whole group see we're all called to the general ministry, but then also some of you are
Definitely.
called to, God's gifted you to be vocational. And so that, I don't know why that just now hit me, but it did. That's good.
Well, no, I think it's excellent, right? I think it is. I think that what we realize that we've got such a variety. Most of us in our youth groups have folks from a variety of different backgrounds. You've got some that have grown up in church, and their moms and dads are plugged into church, and they kind of, and more than likely, a student in that kind of a family situation and background is going to have a greater awareness of pastors' roles and those kind of things because they've
Mhm.
grown up in it. But we're reaching a lot of students that are new to the faith, they're new to church, and they don't have any idea necessarily of how things work or the roles of the
Mhm.
various people that they see on Sundays and Wednesdays and these kind of things. And so, any opportunity that we can give to students to experience a day in the life of, or just have a conversation during the summer break, right? To just simply invite them to spend the afternoon with us, right? Hey, I'm going to be working on this, or I'm going to be, serving in this area, and love to have you join me. And all those are opportunities for folks to get a chance to see what we do and to consider whether or not God is leading them in that way.
Well, Dr. Odom, man, this has been good. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been a lot of good stuff that I think will help a lot of guys that are just starting off or maybe been in ministry for just a few years. I think it's a lot of really good stuff. So thank you so much for being willing to come on.
Well, thank you, man, and I appreciate you and all that you're doing. Thank you for doing this podcast and serving youth leaders in this way. And I think it's just a tremendous thing, and I appreciate it.
Before we wrap up, I do want to give you an opportunity. I'm kind of putting you on the spot. Share where they can find Youth Ministry Institute. I know that's helpful.
Yes.
or anything like that. That and I'm giving you a moment, selfish plug, a selfless plug,
Yeah.
plug,
Right.
plug stuff that the book, what stuff they can find from you.
Sure, sure. I did mention the website. I'll mention it again. So it's deconstructingym.com. Don't let the name scare you away from youth ministry. It's not one of those youth ministry books that says that youth ministry is terrible and we should stop doing that. It's really the opposite. It's kind of a love letter to youth ministry, and it's just simply saying, hey, let's take a critical examination of why we do what we do, and all with the desire and the goal to make it better, right, and to be more effective in the way we're reaching students and parents. And so check out Youth Ministry Deconstructed. You can find it on Amazon and all around where books are available. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Sweet. Well, if this is your very first time listening to our podcast, we have several episodes. We're in the middle of season 4, but please go back and check out other ones that are super helpful. All of them, we focus on questions that are right in the wheelhouse of the guests. So whatever they're really good at, that's what we try to focus in on. And so every episode's a little different, but really is coming from an expert in whatever field of student ministry that they're in. But check out those episodes, and we can't wait to see you on the next one.